Good morning, everyone. So, we are going to have a wonderful show today. I have a guest, Maria Noël Groves, and I'll tell you a little bit about her and show you some slides of her books and everything like that. So, we're going to be talking about gut healing. This is a very important topic, and I think that it really would resonate with the audience. So, I'm really pleased to invite her, and I'm just going to go ahead and, sorry, tried to silence my phone there. I want you to see who we're going to be speaking with. Again, her name is Maria Noël Groves. She is an award-winning, best-selling author of the book Body into Balance. It was actually really inspiring and really interesting to know that this is a book that's used in herbal schools around the country. She also has Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. So for all the gardeners out there, this is a really wonderful book. And I actually have the honor of having her books as well. So let me go ahead and show our guest here. And I'm going to let me silence my phone so I can look at the comments here just to keep along. So how are you doing today, Maria?
I'm doing great. I am super honored to be here. So thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and I got a chance to look through your book, Body into Balance. It is a really wonderful book, and I could see why it's in herb schools because it definitely is really beginner friendly. Has so many wonderful pictures of all the herbs. So yeah, definitely can't. I'm really excited to get into today's chat. All right. So the first question I have for you is, every herbalist, we kind of have those areas that really resonate with us. And so for you, how did gut healing come about? How did you get your interest into gut healing?
I wish I had a great individual story for you. I have stories around, my own entry into herbalism really centered more around anxiety and insomnia after a traumatic event. And that's what really dove me into herbal medicine. But once I started working with clients and also teaching classes, I discovered that a lot of folks really have a lot of digestive issues. And I also found that herbs seem to be really, really helpful for that, much in the same way that they tend to be really, really helpful for supporting the nervous system. One of the areas that, herbs can be helpful for many things, but I
Right.
find that one of the areas in which they really do a stellar job supporting is the digestive system. And it's not the only piece, diet, stress, lots of other things can play a role in digestive wellness, but the herbs just seem to be really, really helpful. And so I had a lot of clients early on whom we were able to really help support balance in their digestive systems with herbal remedies. And then it just kind of grew from there. I did end up having some of my own digestive stuff. Usually that part of my body is in pretty good shape, but I ended up developing an ulcer at one point early in my herbal studies that I was able to work with herbs. And then I also have a family history of Crohn's and inflammatory bowel disease and these kinds of more serious gut issues. And natural remedies ended up being really helpful for some of my family members to address that too. So, it kind of run the gamut from just sort of supporting healthier digestive fire to supporting gut healing and, just improving the integrity of the gut lining. So there are many ways in which herbs seem to be really helpful.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned that, even though that may not be your personal story, but so many people around you are going through that. And so it is important, and even if this isn't something that's specific to you, to know for other, family members that you may have in your home or those around you. So I think that that's really wonderful. What are some other areas that really seem to be your calling, that really feel home for you?
Well,
Some other
definitely
areas. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, yeah. Oh, no, no, that's okay. Definitely nervous system support is a big area for myself personally, whether it's sleep or stress or anxiety or things of that nature. And I often do find herbs really supportive, not always, but oftentimes. And a lot of my clients come in with those types of concerns and often do find quite a bit of solace and support from various plants. And then I also have a bit of reputation of helping support folks who are having feminine reproductive hormone balance issues. So things like PMS, perimenopause, menopause, and I personally am now dealing with menopause and having a chance to utilize many of these herbs myself. And those are probably some of the key areas that I work with. I do focus a lot on blood sugar support, just for like most people day to day, blood sugar support, and thyroid, especially hypothyroid. Those things seem to be very common, I think, across our whole culture,
Right.
but amongst many of the folks who come through my door or come via telephone.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me, so why might someone want to support their gut health? And how can they do that? What are some ways that, someone who's listening, things that they maybe can even do today or this week to get them started?
Yeah, definitely. There are so many different ways to support gut health with herbs and with diet and lifestyle. And there are a lot of different things that could be going on with the individual person. So often it's helpful to think about what your personal patterns are. And so some folks have a little bit of sluggish digestion or low stomach acid, which is quite common. And so for those folks, oftentimes we'll turn to herbal bitters, so herbs that taste bitter, foods that taste bitter, as well as carminatives, which are many of our spicy herbs and our common beverage tea herbs like peppermint or chamomile or something like that. And those herbs tend to do a nice job increasing digestive juices and function and enzymes. And so I do love that particular class of herbs.
Mhm.
A lot of those spices also can be helpful for gas and pain and bloating, those carminative, spicy, warming herbs, because they're also oftentimes anti-spasmodic. So sometimes that's helpful, like
Right.
when folks are dealing with gas, pain, and bloating, whereas sometimes some of the stronger anti-spasmodic herbs might actually bother something like reflux. So, for example, peppermint oftentimes irritates people with reflux, and it may not have to do with where somebody's stomach acid is at. It could just be the fact that peppermint is doing such a good job relaxing the sphincter above the stomach and opening it up when it should be closed while we're digesting food. And then, we have another category of herbs that tend to be really helpful for sliming and soothing coating the digestive
Mhm.
lining, which is often helpful, but particularly when that lining is irritated, damaged, inflamed. Those tend to be the times that we particularly think of those herbs. And then there are still two additional herbs that tend to support wound healing and connective tissue integrity, and those are many of the herbs that we think about for using topically for when we have cuts and scrapes and things like that. But they're also, as long as they're safe to consume, they're also pretty excellent herbs to take internally as well.
Wow, you gave a lot of information there. And I love the way, and it's really just like in your book, you really do. You're not only saying these herbs are good, but you explain what they're doing and how they help, the body to, get balanced. So you talked about anti-spasmodic herbs. Can you just, lightly define that for those who may not know what that term is? And also carminative, I think you used that word. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, just so
Yes,
the audience knows a little bit more about what those words mean.
yeah. So an antispasmodic herbs is an herb that eases spasm. So they tend to have a relaxing effect on the musculature. And so they tend to be really helpful. And many of these have an affinity for the smooth muscles that line the gut lining. So some muscle relaxing herbs have an affinity more for one type of muscle versus another. And many of our carminative herbs are particularly helpful to help relax muscles and ease spasms in the types of muscles that we have in our digestive tract. That's basically lining the whole tract. And we need muscle action. I mean, muscle action
Right.
is what
Yeah.
moves through food through. So they're not like a total, like just numbing the muscles out, but they just tend to help when things are really tight and tense. Those are herbs that we might use to just sort of help relax, especially in the lower GI system when we're dealing with gas and pain and bloating. But
Mhm.
some of those stronger ones might be irritating for reflux because they may also act on that sphincter above the stomach and relax it too much. But it depends on the strength of the herb, and it can also depend on the person as well. Also, those same often carminative antispasmodic herbs are usually stimulating digestive function, as I was mentioning before. And so that often tends to be that category of herbs that tends to be a little bit spicy and aromatic. They're often a little bit relaxing to the musculature and sometimes relaxing to the nerves as well, like chamomile and lemon balm would be,
Yeah.
and catnip as well. And then also have that digestion enhancing and often a slightly warming activity in the body.
Yeah. Also, they do tend to have, be very aromatic herbs. A lot of, the kitchen spices, they smell so good and wonderful. And they also help with digestion. And I do talk about sometimes how that really that's why they were added with these foods to really help, cut, with the grease or of some of the foods or with the acid of some of the foods, that those can really help our digestion as well. So thank you for explaining those too. And you also talked about the need also for some herbs that are slippery with the mucilage, the demulcent herbs as well. And also with the healing and how it not only works, on our outer skin, but kind of like our inner skin, which is pretty much what the digestive tract is. So thank you for elaborating on that, because, a lot of people don't know, how all those, they think this herb is only for inside, only for teas, but it can be used on the skin as well. So thank you for sharing that. So why do you specifically like teas for gut healing?
Teas are fantastic because they come into contact with the digestive system so well, particularly the upper GI, but they do seem to be really helpful for the lower GI as well.
Mhm.
So, especially when folks are dealing with issues in the upper GI, like for example, if folks have reflux and they're having some damage or irritation on the esophagus or in the stomach, by drinking the herbs as a tea, you have this contact that's being made all along. Also, often when you're having a tea, you're sipping it over a period of time. So it's not just this one exposure and then you're done. It's like maybe a constant exposure over a half an hour or an hour or even several hours if you're sipping it throughout the day. So you're just constantly applying those herbal remedies directly to the area. In addition, water, and whether it's hot water or cold water depends on the herbs and the specific constituents, but water is a really good solvent for a lot of the constituents or the chemicals that are in these plants that we want to utilize for our benefit. And so having that hot water or cold water extraction is a great way to release. And some constituents like those mucilaginous, the slippery, slimy mucilaginous constituents, they don't extract well via other constituents or other solvents, rather, like
Right.
alcohol or vinegar. And water, in addition, is very soothing. So if you have an irritated GI system, then dousing a bunch of vinegar or alcohol on it really may not work that well. Or if you swallow a pill, that might be nice, but now the whole a large chunk of the upper GI never got exposed to that particular herb. Whereas if you have that tea, it's just such a great way to deliver so many of our digestive supportive herbs. There can still be a place for, a tincture or vinegar, elixir, or something like that, especially when it comes to the herbs that increase digestion. But when it comes to soothing and healing, and especially in the upper GI, tea is really pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and I love that made people aware that water is an extractor too, because sometimes we may think that you only, you have to use, like you said, alcohol or whatnot, and those are the extractors, or glycerin. But also the water is an extractor, and it is a really great tool of medicine, and you can make very strong teas as well. So don't discount teas. I think that that's really wonderful. So what are some signs so maybe someone's watching this and they don't even know that they really are in need of some gut healing. So maybe what are some signs, or, some things that someone may be dealing with that they think is normal that is not, and is indicative of needing gut healing.
Yeah, well, I have to be a little careful, and I'm probably going to overstep my bounds a little bit in my language anyway, just because it's hard not to. But as an herbalist, we can't diagnose, we can't prescribe, we're not
Right. Yeah.
allowed to be working with diseases. So, with all of that in mind, generally we're going to be thinking of gut healing herbs when there seems to be some kind of irritation, inflammation, damage, crankiness to the gut lining. And so, I tend to think of that as a supportive option when folks are dealing with ulcers, reflux, gastritis, leaky gut, or just they're noticing like a lot of pain and discomfort as food is going through, like not necessarily the gas and spasm type of pain, but other forms of discomfort, like maybe some burning or just things just really don't feel quite right. And of course, it's a good idea to also see a doctor or gastroenterologist to make sure that you get a proper diagnosis. And sometimes modern medicine is the most appropriate route to go. But even in those cases, oftentimes the herbs can be really supportive alongside. So, but you do want to know what you're working with. Things like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, um, ulcers can be really serious and may require medical interventions. I have a client who had Crohn's before she came to me, and she had a bowel resection. And when they took out some of the large intestine, it was the consistency of string, and which is alarming. And it was appropriate for her to get surgery for that.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's any amount of gut healing herbs that are going to take tissue that's string and bring it back together again. But for what a lot of us are dealing with those kind of day to day general irritations, oftentimes the herbs can be phenomenally supportive in the moment, but especially if you're consuming them over the course of months or even a year or two. I have seen some clients who on endoscopies see really great results that over time things tend to just heal up entirely.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up, because I do always try to give a disclaimer, because, we do have to be, careful. I did want to mention also that Maria is a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, the AHG, and she also is a clinical herbalist, and she runs Wintergreen Botanicals Herbal Education Center in New Hampshire. So I didn't mention that before, but I think that, once you said that, it reminded me that I did want to say that, she has been working as a clinical herbalist. And so, as she said, she has a lot of clients that, have issues with gut healing. And these are suggestions that, and ways that she's found through 20 years or more of her study, found that this can be helpful for gut healing. So let's see. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the herbs that you picked as some of your favorites for the gut. So let's start with marshmallow leaf, and I want to show a little bit of pictures. And yeah, let me know what makes marshmallow leaf so special for the gut.
So, marshmallow leaf and marshmallow root both have a pretty similar affinity for the digestive system. And I love working with both of them. So, I'll mention the root actually first, because that's what most people are more familiar with around marshmallow is the root. And it is a really great supportive part of the plant. So, marshmallow in general just has this property of being soothing, a little bit slimy, which some people are afraid of. It can be really slimy. So if you take marshmallow root powder, which is the most mucilaginous way of working with it, and you mix it with a little bit of water, it will turn into the consistency of mucus. And basically what marshmallow is doing and other mucilaginous herbs are doing is they're going in and they're coating the gut lining and helping to create a protective barrier, because we should have some amount of mucus all along our digestive lining, especially very, rich in the stomach where there's a lot of acid, and it tends to protect. It also tends to help feed our gut flora, and so as we're eating it, it's going to help feed our healthy gut flora, and it can also coat and soothe and heal. And then usually too, it encourages the body to start to produce more of its own mucus in a good way. Often we think of mucus as being bad, but really it's about balance. And so for people who are really dry and irritated and inflamed, that can be really helpful. And for me, it's a major herb that I personally have found helpful in my own life. It's one of my great affinities of an herb. But I don't necessarily always work with it as a root powder, because that's just a little bit less convenient. The texture can be a little bit off-putting, but the cut and sifted root is really nice. And I actually have a little bit here.
Oh, great.
I don't know if you
Yes.
want me to show this to folks. So, this is what the cut and sifted root is like. And you can add it to tea blends, or you can make it into its own little overnight infusion. I actually have one kind of sitting here that's been sitting overnight already, and that will do a nice job. We'll talk more later about extracting marshmallow root, but marshmallow root is nice like that. Now, sometimes you want even less slime still. And with this overnight infusion of the cut and sifted root, you get this little bit of velvety, like there's a little bit of a slime factor, but it's pleasant. It's velvety. It's very hydrating. It can be really nice for folks who are dealing with dryness in their digestive system, including in their mouth, or just feeling dry in general. It's a really great moistening herb to support folks who are dealing with dryness. And so that's nice. And it's a much more pleasant consistency. Now, I did mention that the starches and those complex mucopolysaccharides that make that mucilaginous quality, that they feed healthy gut flora. So that can generally be a good thing, but there are some people who have dysbiosis where their flora is not quite as healthy as it should be, and they maybe have more of the pathogenic gut flora, or maybe the gut flora has creeped up into the small intestines, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And sometimes with those folks, when they introduce high mucilaginous herbs, they actually get a little gassy and bloated, and it may seem to aggravate some of their symptoms. And so, if that's the case, it may be that marshmallow root's not really the right herb for you. And with all these things, if you listen to your body will tell you, like, does spicy ginger make you feel better, or does soothing mucilaginous marshmallow make you feel better? Do bitters make you feel better or worse? Your body will tell you what it needs just by listening to how it responds. And so, if I still want a little bit of that soothing mucilaginous quality, but I do have somebody who has a high likelihood for maybe overreacting to those starches, then a lot of times I'll turn to the leaf. And the leaf has soothing qualities, but it is not quite as mucilaginous. And if you're growing herbs, it's easier to harvest a lot of leaf matter and dry it and work with it for tea. It makes a lovely background ingredient in all sorts of different kinds of beverage teas, and will help offset some of the dryness of other herbs, like, say, stinging nettles, or just whatever. Stinging nettles is a good example, that adding some marshmallow leaf to that tea blend will help balance the drying qualities of the nettles. So I work with all those parts, and I may pick and choose depending upon what's going on with the person and how slimy I want that tea to be.
Awesome. So it looks like in these pictures you actually harvested this marshmallow plant. What did you do? You remember what you did with it, or what do you usually do when you harvest the whole plant like this?
Yeah, so actually in my garden, I mostly harvest the leaves just because it's really easy and I get lots of plant material. And I often end up buying the cut and sifted root just because it's easy. This particular one we dug out of the ground so that we could use it in the photo shoot for Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. And so, since it was already out of the ground, I did wash off those roots with just cold water and a scrubby, and then I chopped it up, and I think I made a syrup with that particular one. Those mucilaginous properties really extract much better in water, and you can simmer them, but they do even better with cold water. So it can make it a little tricky for long preservation techniques. You could also chop it up and dry it, and then maybe break it up a little bit more in a blender and use that as sort of a cut and sifted root for tea. And I have not really tried replanting plants after I've harvested roots, but I know Jim McDonald's an herbalist who talks about pulling it up out of the ground and harvesting a good amount of the roots and then planting the crown back in. And he says that it does tend to regrow pretty well. It's one of the more sustainable root crops, that within a year or 2 years, oftentimes you have a good amount of root, and then you can replant a chunk of that, and then it will generally regrow, and you can just continually harvest the roots of the same plant. But I tend not to. I tend to harvest mostly the leaves of my own plants. So that's what I tend to do. And for the leaves, I tend to cut them down, hang them upside down, let them air dry most of the way. And where I am in New Hampshire, it tends to be too humid for things to dry 100% via air drying. So I will then put them, once they're basically dry, I'll put them in a brown paper bag and put them in my car, and that will crisp them up. And marshmallow leaves do take a while to dry. They're a little more challenging than other herbs, I find. And so once they're totally dry and really nice and crispy, then we'll break them up into smaller pieces and put them in a jar. And I have the jar's actually getting kind of low, but I do have some here. And the flowers, you can't really see them very well because they're very pale colored, but the pale pink flowers are interspersed, and they have similar properties too. So it's fine to include them.
Awesome. And I have here, is this a picture of one of your teas that you made with marshmallow leaf?
So I have that one. I don't think has marshmallow leaf. That the green bits are plantain leaf, which I often also work with in tea. That particular tea blend that you see does have some marshmallow leaf in it, and they both have marshmallow root. Those kind of lighter colored root bits are the marshmallow root. And
Beautiful.
that tea in the picture, I just love how beautiful that is. That's a tea blend that's featured in Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, and it's featuring all local herbs that you could harvest from the garden. And so, often I'll use spices like cinnamon and cardamom and cloves to flavor my gut healing teas. But in that one, because I wanted to try to make a nice gut healing tea with solely herbs from my garden, I used Korean licorice mint for that one, which is closely related to anise hyssop and has this nice sort of soft fennel kind of like flavor. And it made
Okay.
the tea really yummy.
Yeah, I hope you guys are taking notes because she is giving us so much information. And I just love your love for herbs and how you're just so passionate about them. And, when teas look this good, who wouldn't want to try them? If you are just joining, I do want to let you know that go ahead and start writing your comments or your questions in the comment section because we're going to be doing a short Q&A section soon. And actually, she's going to be doing an overnight infusion and a gut healing tea with us. So make sure you stay tuned because we have a lot of wonderful information. Again, if you don't know who I'm speaking with Maria Noël Groves. She's award-winning best-selling author of the book Body into Balance. She also has the other book that she was just mentioning, and that is Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies. She's a registered herbalist. She's a clinical herbalist. She has Wintergreen Botanicals. Let's talk a little bit about, let's see, you have an online herbal study program and you have classes on there. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you offer on your site?
Yes, I would be happy to. So I have all sorts of different herbal programs that I offer, as well as individual classes. Since the pandemic began, I've started to do a lot more live stream online classes, and I will continue to do those because they've been really popular. And then I also am going to be resuming my in-person classes. And then once the classes pass, I have the things recorded. And so most of my classes are also available after the fact as on-demand classes. So I have three different major series. I have a little bit more than three, but the three big ones are my home herbalist series, which is your more beginner, intermediate, foundational herbal program. And I have a live stream slash in-person version of that that's going to be starting in June. And then I have a Beyond the Home Herbalist series, and that just pretty much continues that conversation. So each class is a body system or a health topic. And then we also make at least one remedy to go along with that. And so we pretty much just continue with additional health topics and additional remedies in the Beyond the Home Herbalist series. And that will be going out via live stream in fall. And then I have an advanced program that is pretty expansive and covers a lot more topics. And we're halfway through this year's live stream, and I will be doing next year's live stream and in person throughout the growing season next year. But the Home Herbalist series is one of my favorite ones. It's the most popular series, so I'm really excited to be running that as the sort of simultaneous in-person slash live stream. And they're all available on demand anytime, and you can also opt to get just individual classes. There's
Yeah.
also a gut healing mini course that's on demand, and other odds and ends too. And I also wanted to give you an opportunity because, there might be some folks from my audience who are tuning in and they might not know who you are. So I don't know if you'd be willing to just give like a few moments to talk about yourself and your book.
Oh, well, thank you. And you putting me on the spot, but I love it. Thank you so much. Usually, when I just have a guest, I want people to really just know about you. I do want to mention also, before I forget, that you can look in the description box and I have all of her links. I have the link to, is it wintergreenbotanicals.com? Is that your website,
Yes.
wintergreenbotanicals.com? I also have links to even her Instagram and other places where you can find her and her courses. So do check all of those out. About myself, my name is Khadija Preciado. And I'm all about helping moms, especially really try to get their families to be healthier. And we're using herbs and, herbal remedies. So I really have a love and a passion for herbs. And, I'm more of a community herbalist. People know me as a tea lady. And so I really love sharing about teas and herbs. And I don't have my book here. I wasn't expecting it. But my latest book is, teaching people with everyday herbs. So lots of the ones you can find in your background, your backyard even now. and how you can put those together as well. So how you put your first herbal syrups, tinctures, all of that together. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about, a little bit about the projects that I have as well. Hello, I want to say hello to My Tiny Garden and also to Brampton Gardner. Thank you. Good morning to you ladies as well. All right, so let's talk some more about some herbs. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to plantain because that's what you said was in that tea that I was showing. Instead of actually being marshmallow leaf, it was plantain leaf. Oh, you have some here.
I
Okay.
have some here. And this one's, it's a nice one. I actually got this one from Foster Farm Botanicals because, most people like plantains are this common weed. And, most people know it as the weed that pops up in the cracks of their sidewalks and in their lawns. And you oftentimes, if people do know anything about plantain, they know that you can chew up the leaves and apply them to bug bites and bee stings. And it's really awesome at sort of drawing out those irritations. But plantain is also a fantastic vulnerary herb. So, vulnerary herbs are herbs that support the healing of wounds and tissues, and not only do they do that topically, but they also do that internally. And plantain is really great because it actually has a lot of different things that it does, and many of them are really useful for supporting the digestive system and the healing of it. So not only is it a vulnerary wound healer and supporting the connective tissue integrity, it's also a little bit astringent, so it can help tighten and tone where there's bogginess or leakiness. It's also a little tiny bit um, mucilaginous demulcent, but so much less slimy than marshmallow. So oftentimes it's very broadly supportive for a lot of people for supporting the mucous membrane integrity and lining. And then it's also a little bit antimicrobial as well. So for all those reasons, plantain leaf makes its way into so many of my tea blends, but outside of my garden beds, my soil here in New Hampshire is pretty acidic and poor and sandy. So my plantain leaves are teeny tiny and they just really don't do a whole lot. So I end up purchasing marshmallow leaf mainly from farms whenever I can because I find that that tends to be better quality than what's on the international herb market as a general rule. And so this one's from Foster Farm Botanicals, but I've also gotten them from a couple of my local growers like Terra Basics and Langford Homestead Herbs, and I believe maybe Oshala Farm might sell them too. So you can get marshmallow or you can get plantain leaf from various farms, and it's really a wonderful, wonderful herb to incorporate not only into topical blends but also digestive. Because as I mentioned before, the skin of our digestive system is not that different in a lot of ways than the skin of our body, and so a lot of the herbs that we might use for one area to support healing, we can also use to support the other. And so plantain makes its way into just about every gut healing tea blend that I make.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I was just happy to find we have a Virginia plantain, and it has smaller leaves. And I love that you mentioned Foster Farm Botanicals because I really love them. That's my number one place to when I do purchase because they do grow their own herbs, and it is really important, as you said, to purchase from a local farm if you can. For me, it's not local in the South. We don't have as many options, but I really do love their quality. So a lot of times people ask where can you get some great herbs, and I definitely would recommend Foster Farm Botanicals. So let's also talk about Gotu Kola.
Yeah, so Gotu Kola is a plant that I grow. Most of what I grow, I end up either eating or I end up making tinctures with it just because I don't have a lot. So actually, these two kind of larger pots behind me are overwintering Gotu Kola, Sentella Asiatica, and this is what the leaf looks like. It's this cute little sort of like almost like a mini lily pad looking of a leaf, and it comes from traditions of Ayurveda in India. In Southeast Asia, it's very popular. We have friends from and students from Vietnam and Sri Lanka who love this plant and work with it in a lot of different ways. It supports cognition, it supports nerve health, it's a little bit of a gentle, calming adaptogen, but it's also a fantastic wound healer and connective tissue integrity herb. And I know David Winston talks about working with it when the tissue is hot, irritated, and inflamed, because this is such a soothing, cooling, healing herb. And so it's another great addition to gut healing blends if you have access to it. And I should mention too, if you don't have access to plantain leaf, you could just leave it out of your blend. But if you do have access, they're really nice. I find it harder to get a good quality supply of dried Gotu Kola regularly. It's just a herb that is a little bit more challenging to get good quality and to also get regularly and locally in the herb industry, which is kind of unfortunate because it's such a great plant. But it is pretty easy to grow, so you could also incorporate it into your food. You can cook with it, you can puree it, and then add it to smoothies. It's
Mm.
often consumed in the cultures in which it's traditional as sort of juices, smoothies, teas, sautéed. So there are a lot of different ways that you can work with it. But I do get it as a tea. And this one is from the more international herbal market. So it tends to be a little bit more like brownish looking, which is not ideal. But it's what I can get right now. Whereas if I can get a happier, greener one, I used to have a farm in Massachusetts that would grow it and sell it. And it was beautiful, but they no longer grow herbs because growing
Mm.
herbs and selling them is a challenging
Yeah.
field. But I love adding that to teas too. And also for those folks who don't do as well with marshmallow, Gotu Kola is another potential option for a gut healing tea. So I don't work with it as much in my like standard gut healing teas, but pretty frequently it ends up making its way into a blend when folks need a little extra wound healing, or if I need to kind of find some additional ingredients to fill out that blend if something else wasn't appropriate for the person. And it's just an herb that I really love working with. The flavor is okay. I think it's not as yummy in the tea blends as plantain and marshmallow and spices and rose petals and the herbs that I more frequently use. Meadow Suite, also pretty tasty. Gotu Cola's kind of got this like slightly bitter, slightly celery-like, kind of funny, maybe almost even a little bit salty flavor to it, a little bit astringent and tannic. And so it's okay, but you kind of have to blend it with other things to make it taste good, in my opinion. If you're a picky eater, you might want to blend it with other things to enhance the flavor of it.
Yeah, and I do, like you said, it is, you don't usually see Gotu Kola mentioned in gut healing. So I do love that you brought that up. And like you said, with the healing, I think I remember reading like traditionally it would be used for like ringworm and boils even,
Oh, cool.
like
I didn't know that.
the leaves. So that's really interesting. Oh, I love that you added that in there. So tell me about roses. Roses, as you know, a favorite of many people. So I
Yeah.
know that they'll be really interested. And let's see the roses that you
So
have.
these are roses. These are from Mountain Rose Herbs, which is where I get a lot of my bigger supplies of. And it's gotten very expensive. I do grow roses, but the roses that I grow, I mainly work with fresh, and they make their way into glycerin extracts, and they make their way into my waters and things like that throughout the summer. So I end up purchasing rose petals personally just out of convenience for bigger batches for making teas. And I love sprinkling just a little bit of rose petals into the gut healing teas. They're in there for a couple different reasons, and I usually don't use a lot of them just because one, they're expensive, but also the other ingredients are so nice. So one, I just love having a little bit of flower petals in my loose tea blends in general because they just make us smile as we're brewing up our teas, and they look really beautiful. And roses have an affinity for the heart and for self love and self care. And often when people are dealing with chronic digestive issues, they do need a little extra support for that. And so I love that sort of vibe of roses. But additionally, there are legitimate medicinal activities to roses beyond, actual biochemical medicinal benefits to roses too for gut support. So they are a little bit astringent, and those astringent herbs, kind of like the plantain leaves, will tighten and tone bogginess, help support healing, mildly antimicrobial, and at the same time helping to feed gut flora. So herbs like roses as well as ginger have this nice affinity where they're able to help support healthy gut flora while also gently discouraging the less healthy gut flora. So they really do have a biochemical reason to be in gut healing teas. But one of the big reasons I put them in there is just because they're so pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, I love adding them for the pop of color as well. And the taste is also really wonderful.
Yes.
Let's talk about Meadow Sweet.
Yeah. So this is another one that is from my garden. And this one, so you can actually see that it's like nice and happy and green, and there are little, you may not be able to see it in the video, but there are like little itty bitty flowers. It looks almost like when you go in the garden when Meadow Sweet is in bloom, the flowers, the petals fall off really quickly, and it almost looks like somebody took a little mini hole punch and like punched little pieces of paper all over the garden. So it's a trick to get out and harvest Meadow Sweet when it's in bloom before the flowers go by, but I personally tend to harvest it at that time. And we work with both the leaves and the flowers, and the leaves are more voluminous, so I mostly it's leaves, but there are some flowers in there too. And so meadowsweet is a neat plant because it has just a little bit of a lot of different kinds of anti-inflammatory, sort of aspirin-ish related constituents. So the salicylates, methyl salicylate, which is in wintergreen and birch and has that wintergreeny flavor, as well as some of the other salicylates that might be present in willow bark that tends to be a little bit more bitter and aspiriny, but the quantities are sort of this low fuzz and the flavor is really nice. You end up with this flavor that's kind of fresh and sweet, hence the name meadow sweet. It likes to grow in meadows and it tastes sweet. And it really brightens up the tea blend. There's this kind of almost cherry, honey, um, watermelony kind of flavor that it imparts, which in itself is enjoyable. But medicinally, it's a little bit demulcent, so it's a little bit soothing, as well as a little bit astringent, so a little bit tightening and toning, and most potently anti-inflammatory. And a lot of our aspirin, both our conventional aspirin, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and even to some extent, some of our aspirin E herbs, our salicylate rich herbs, they tend to be irritating to the gut. They tend to decrease inflammation elsewhere, but increase inflammation in the gut. And meadowsweet is unique in that it tends to really have a strong affinity for also reducing inflammation in the gut and supporting healthy gut lining, unlike almost all of the other ones. And so I don't always work with it. A lot of my other colleagues work with it more often, and that's what inspired me to start playing around with it more now that I have a more ready supply of it from my garden and also from some other local farms. And it has turned out to be really helpful, especially when people are dealing with a lot of inflammation and irritation in their gut lining for a variety of reasons. And it tastes really nice. So often I'll end up combining for those folks who don't tolerate marshmallow, I'll end up combining meadowsweet and plantain and Gotu Kola as just a trio and maybe some additional flavorful herbs. And that has been really helpful for some folks dealing with acid reflux and similar odds and ends.
Awesome, awesome. So I wrote a whole bunch of things down that I wanted to. Don't you just love, as you said, like the herbs that really just kind of tell you a little bit about them with their name, like the meadow sweet, as you brought up, or even the marshmallow. How it likes is the water. So I just think that that's just really wonderful. I do love how you talk about the water aspect of having astringency but then also demulcent, and that can be really confusing to people because they're like, how can it be both? Sometimes it's relaxing but then it's also has some stimulating, how herbs are. What do you say to that it can be, do you think that that's a wonderful thing, that herbs are just really different and can't be boxed, or you think that that can be something challenging? And maybe you can share some light on how someone can understand how a plant can do both.
Yeah, I love to put things in boxes. I'm slightly OCD and I love my spreadsheets and my charts, and my books and my class notes are always, have all these charts, but really like nature and plants are and people, we don't fit neatly into boxes. And so that's one of the beautiful things I think
Yeah.
about them. And so a lot of herbs have multiple actions and constituents. And to some extent, you might even be able to vary the chemistry based on little minimal things like whether you're using hot water that's gonna extract more of the astringent
I
tannins.
lost you. Oh, okay.
Oh,
Oh, you cut out a little bit.
oh,
Can you repeat that last sentence?
yeah, so I was saying about how sometimes you can even adjust the chemistry of your tea based on whether you're using hot water, which is gonna extract more of those astringent tannins, or cold water, which will emphasize more of the mucilaginous properties. But it actually makes sense in a lot of cases to have a little bit of both those activities because we can restore moisture while also helping to tighten and tone where there's damage or leakiness. And sometimes that's actually really helpful. And there are quite a few herbs that have both sort of
Hmm.
tightening and toning and demulcent or soothing moistening properties like Meadow Suite, plantain, sassafras leaves, linden flowers. There really are quite a few that are in that category. And if you did want to emphasize one over the other, you could opt for hot or cold water,
Yeah.
depending.
So yeah, I love that. All right. Also, let's talk about. I heard you say a bunch of different things that we use as spices. You talked about cardamom, cloves, and even ginger. Are there any of those that you want to talk about before we get into the wonderful presentation that you have for us?
Yeah, so I have my classic quote unquote chai spices.
Mhm.
So a little bit, full disclosure, a little bit of appropriation there. And so apologies for that. But these are some of the flavors that I really love incorporating into a lot of teas, including their very purposeful additions to gut healing teas. So cinnamon, I love adding. I've got your cassia cinnamon, which is a little bit harder, more astringent, more potently antimicrobial. And I've also got the Ceylon or true cinnamon that is more papery, a little bit gentler, but also really lovely. So a lot of times I'll use a combo of two, and I'll usually use sticks or chips because they just get less slimy. Cinnamon is another herb that's simultaneously very astringent, but also very mucilaginous. And sometimes it's so mucilaginous that the powder just turns into this slimy loogie in the bottom of your teacup, which is medicinal, but not always very pleasant. So cinnamon is going to help support digestion. It is a great carminative herb. It's also a little bit antimicrobial. It also is particularly on the astringent side, so nice if folks are dealing with more loose stools. And so I may adjust more or less cinnamon depending upon where somebody's bowel habits are like, but it does tend to tighten and tone up when folks are having more chronic loose stools or diarrhea, and it adds a nice flavor as well. I love the taste of cinnamon personally. And then star anise, I'll usually do one or two per pot, depending upon how big the pot is. And that's also just really delicious and sweetening. Sometimes I'll break it up and sometimes I'll leave them whole, but regardless, they're really delicious, antimicrobial, carminative, a little bit antispasmodic, and so great addition there. Those make their way into almost every gut healing tea I make because they're just so yummy. Sometimes I'll add cardamom pods, which is one of my personal ingredients whenever I'm trying to add chai-like flavors or masala chai-like flavors to my tea blends, and it adds that sort of classic flavor that we associate with certain Indian curries and masala chai tea, but it is very stimulating to the digestion. So it helps as antimicrobial, it helps kick up stomach acids and enzymes. And so if somebody has a really sensitive GI system, I might use less or I might not use cardamom at all. And or if somebody just really doesn't like certain flavors, I'll adjust accordingly. And you can crush them up or you can leave them whole, whatever is more convenient for you. And they're quite yummy as long as you like the taste of cardamom. I also often will add a couple cloves, maybe 5 to 10 cloves per pot, just whole cloves, and they have a little bit of a numbing, antimicrobial, also carminative action as well. And I like the flavor they add, but kind of like the cardamom, cloves and cardamom can easily overpower if you use too much of them. So I really just use a little bit of them where I might use a little bit more cinnamon. Ginger, I don't have with me today, but if somebody needs a little bit more warming, digestion, enhancing activity, I'll often add ginger, or if that's a flavor that they really enjoy, or I might have them add fresh ginger at home to their tea blend. And I should say that I don't sell herbs to the general public, so these are just things I'm sharing with you if you want to try making some of your own similar creations. So all the spices have just some mild antimicrobial as well as digestion enhancing properties, but then each one of them has their own special affinities. Fennel seeds, sometimes I'll add if folks need more antispasmodic, gas, pain, and bloating action, and if they like that particular flavor. So lots of options.
Okay, yeah, awesome. All right, so then we have our last question. And how do you, and you did touch on this at brief periods, but how do you make teas more person specific? I heard you were talking about some substitutions along the way, but is there anything else you want to add as far as energetics or bigger picture support or just the situation? How do you tailor it to the needs?
Yeah, there's so many different ways that we might work to tailor something to somebody's individual needs. So one would be like, how useful or not useful are those mucilaginous herbs for somebody? Are they finding them actually irritating and causing more gas or bloating? Or it almost seems like paradoxically, some people end up with reflux increasing with those herbs, whereas most people would notice less reflux with those herbs. So if they're having those reactions, if they're telling me that bread is making them have worse reflux, I will often be more cautious with the marshmallow, and I'll either turn to marshmallow leaf or I may just avoid marshmallow entirely. I usually don't see any problems with marshmallow leaf. So sometimes I'll just go with that. So that's one consideration right there. Whereas I might use more of it if folks are like more irritated, inflamed, they seem more dry, that moistening mucilaginous property of marshmallow, especially marshmallow root, might be even better. And then if they seem to have a lot of inflammation going on, maybe even some pain, I might consider the Meadow Suite. And that would be when I often will start to integrate that into the blend. Um, the spices are something that I will often shift around based off of what's going on with a person, as I was mentioning, whether it seems like they need more warming, increased digestion, if things are just sort of sluggish and they feel like they're sitting, and when they have things that are bitter or spicy or sour, that feels like that makes their digestion work even better, that I will emphasize those spices even more. Whereas if they tell me that, like, oh, I feel worse with spices, I feel worse with bitter things, those, then I might de-emphasize those and I might turn to gentler herbs like anise hyssop or Korean licorice mint or fennel seed or meadow sweet as the flavoring agents of the blend. Also, folks can do broths with these herbs. And so I might do less of the spices because depending upon what flavor you want in the broth, that may or may not be complementary with the dish that you're making. So, there's so many ways to adapt it. And oftentimes I find that if we just listen to the body and think about things you already know, do you feel good with spicy food? Not even just hot spicy, but just aromatic spicy food, or do you feel worse with those? Do you do well with things like oatmeal and starchy things, or do those tend to make you feel worse? Do you feel better with bitters or worse? Those are the kinds of questions, ginger, that will help guide me and that can help guide you. And then with the individual herbs, you can just try them and listen to your body. And if they feel like they're helping, then they probably are helping. And if you feel worse, then I would probably stop using them and take that information to think that maybe you want to go in a totally different direction.
Yeah. In your practice, have you seen that, wheat, gluten, dairy, those things can even be a big contributor? I hear a lot of times that is to, the gut, having issues as well.
Yeah, definitely a lot of folks, especially folks with chronic digestive issues just across the board, often don't tend to do well with gluten and dairy. So those are not always the best ways to sleuth things out since most people have problems with those foods. But if they're even reacting to like gluten-free bread and they're reacting to oatmeal, then those might be some like, like maybe there wouldn't do well with mucilaginous herbs either. But yeah, definitely, irritating foods are often a big player in digestive issues. And if we have poor digestive function to begin with, we're often more likely to develop food sensitivities and food allergies over time because of the sort of irritation and the sequelae that happens with eating food and not properly digesting it, and then having food particles further down the digestive tract that aren't properly broken down. But sometimes folks are so far into that process that we need to soothe and heal first before we can, work on restoring the gut function and stomach acid and enzymes and all of that.
Yeah, I really love it. So, are you ready to? Which preparation did you want to start with today? Did you want to start with the overnight infusion or the gut healing?
Let's do the overnight infusion first, because that one's really easy actually. And so I have a jar here. And so, usually like a quart-sized mason jar works pretty well. I like suspending the herb at the top because it allows it to really circulate through. But if you don't have something, a big cloth or something to suspend it on the top, it's totally fine. You could also just let it float loose and it will still make a good tea. So don't feel like you need to have that. And then for this, we usually use the marshmallow cut and sifted root. And I mentioned that cold water tends to do a particularly nice job extracting mucilage. So you could actually start with hot or cold water, but it doesn't really matter. When you're just working with marshmallow, either is totally fine. And sitting in that cooler or room temp water over time is really what's going to do it. So I've got a big tablespoon here. I'm going to add just a couple heaping spoonfuls. A good rule of thumb is like 1 heaping teaspoon per every cup, but I might even end up using a little bit more than that because this is a good amount. And so let's do 2, and maybe I'll even throw just like another scant one in. So I've probably got, a good amount there. And then you just cover it with water. Can be hot or cold. I've done tests. It really doesn't seem to matter that much. Heating it will break the bonds a little bit, but I am not personally concerned about that. Some herbalists are, but I think of it like bone broth. And, when you heat up bone broth that's really gelatinous, it liquefies, but we still get the benefits of that gelatinousness. And if you let it sit and cool again, it will kind of thicken up. So I personally, whether you want this hot or cold is going to be more of a personal preference than a big issue, but it's that time that really helps. So I just do that. And then I put it on the counter or the fridge and I let it sit overnight or for 24 hours, whatever, whatever works. There is a risk of microbial growth. So if you do have a really sensitive system to bacteria, if you have histamine intolerance, this might not be a good remedy for you, but for most of us, it's totally fine. I usually store mine in the fridge, which is going to limit that. And so this is one that's been sitting overnight and it's not like solid like a bone broth, like a really thick bone broth would be, but there's a little bit of a viscousness that you'd be able to see drinking it. And so then you just strain it out and you can reheat it or not reheat it, and you can add other things to it if you want. Plain it's kind of mild, and sometimes I'll add a cinnamon stick or 2 or a pinch of nutmeg for flavor. Another thing I'll sometimes do if folks really need to coat and soothe, I might add oat milk and a little bit of maple syrup as long as it's tolerated for sweetness, and a pinch of nutmeg, and it's really, really delicious and really soothing. But, not everybody tolerates the sugars that are naturally present in oat milk and maple syrup. So it will depend on the person for that. So that's really easy. But now, if you want to be working with a lot of different kinds of herbs, including marshmallow, but also, those spices, we're starting to mix things that if we were doing them individually, they would each have different techniques. You would do, maybe the cold overnight infusion, long infusion of an infusion just means steeping versus simmering of the marshmallow. But spices, really simmering them is going to get the most out of those hard spices. But, our leafy herbs and our flowery herbs, we don't want to simmer those because it's too much heat for them. So we usually would just do like a short steep of those. So the way that I work when I'm combining a lot of these different ingredients is I start with hot water and I do a longer infusion. So at least a couple hours, if not overnight. And if you want, once it's cooled off, you could put it in the fridge or you could just leave it on the counter. And so I'm going to add those spices that I had. And the benefit is that because we're starting with hot water and we're letting them sit for so long, we will get a lot of the properties out of the spices, even though we're not simmering them. So I'll add those. You could also add other things like holy basil, lemon balm, ashwagandha, lots of herbs that you could throw in. Maybe I'll throw in a little bit of Meadow Suite for its healing properties and yummy flavor. Just going to throw like a spoonful. Usually you're going to use a couple heaping tablespoons per 32-ounce container. And you don't need to use a French press, but it does make it really convenient to strain it out later on. So we've got a little bit of the Meadow Suite. I could throw a little bit of Marshmallow Leaf in there. So maybe I'll throw a spoonful or so of Marshmallow Leaf. There's a lot of flexibility on the proportions here. Just the spices, you usually don't need a ton of spices to get their healing benefits. Plantain, you could go for a lot or a little, but I'm just going to use about a spoonful of plantain, which is kind of bland but not bad tasting, especially when you combine it with other more flavorful herbs. I am personally going to throw some marshmallow root in here, and the marshmallow root is one of the reasons why we're going to want to let it steep so long. Also because of the spices, and we're trying to get over the fact that they're not being simmered, so the longer time period is going to be helpful for that too. Let's see, I'm going to throw 2 tablespoons. I just eyeball this. I mean, when I'm creating blends for clients, I weigh everything out and everything's very specific, but this is approximately what ends up. And then I'm just going to throw a little bit of rose petals. They're just so pretty. And I could throw Gotu Kola in there too. I think I'm going to skip the Gotu Kola just because I don't really like the taste of it in my teas. So I have a good amount of plant material in there. Probably, what's that, like almost a cup per 32 ounces, maybe a little less than that. And then I'm just going to cover it with hot water. And I usually bring the water up to a pretty good boil. This is a little cooled off, but it's good enough. And just kind of mix that in. And then I'll cover it up to the top. The more free-floating your herbs are, oftentimes the more potent they will be. Put the top on. And then once we are ready to drink it, which, could be this evening or it could be tomorrow morning, you'll strain it out and then you can just drink it throughout the day. You can refrigerate the extras if you want to, and you can have it hot or cold. It's all nice. And you can, once you've had one batch, you can see like how it feels in your body, how you like the taste of it, and you can shift the recipes around. Sometimes I will set up clients with individual baggies of cardamom pods and cinnamon sticks and things, so that way they can figure out for themselves how much or how little they like best. And I might just sort of have the more bland medicinal base, and then they add the flavors as they want to, depending upon where they're at. And you could go for totally different flavors too. You could skip the spices and do holy basil, and that would add some stress support and digestion support, and it would add great flavor. So there are lots of different ways that you can adapt this recipe, but this is a pretty typical one, and it usually tastes pretty nice. So I usually get good compliance, and you could sweeten it if you wanted to and if that was appropriate for your body. But oftentimes with the spices and those sweeter ingredients, it tastes naturally sweet on its own and isn't really necessary to sweeten it.
So we have a question. How long should you allow the tea to steep before you use it? When you make your hot infusions and then when you make your cold infusions, how long do you usually steep those?
So if you have marshmallow in it, then I would let it steep for ideally at least 4 hours, but a half a day to a full day is going to extract it even better. So that would be kind of ideal, but whatever is convenient for you is also fine. And the same thing in both cases, really, that's the approximate amount. If you didn't have marshmallow in there, and especially the marshmallow root, then a shorter steep might be totally fine. You just might not get as much flavor out of the harder spices. But if you were using leafier herbs like Korean licorice mint or anise hyssop, or maybe you powdered up those spices, cinnamon's tricky powdered, but most of the other ones can be powdered, they'll release a lot faster. So, even just a half hour steep might be fine if you weren't going for mucilaginous herbs and if you had easier release flavorful herbs. So it depends on the specific ingredients that you decided to use, but most of the time we'll do like an overnight infusion where you prep it the night before and then you start drinking it in the morning.
Yes. And then lastly, are there any of the herbs that you talked about, are any of them that you would recommend for beginners that are just trying to grow herbs for the first time?
Well, I love marshmallow. Once you get it established in its happy place, one plant produces a lot of leaf material to work with and is a really delight. It's super soft. It's fun to pet while you're out in the garden because it's just such a delightful herb that gets pretty tall. Um, What else do we have here? I do find that Gotu Kola, as long as you have a really rich soil and good moisture, it likes. It's a very water needy plant, which is why I have those little watering systems in them to help keep them moist. But I get really good results with Gotu Kola, growing that in a pot with lots of moisture. Um, Roses are delightful. I love anishyssop or Korean licorice mint, the ones that taste more fennel honey like, and that's a really beautiful, flavorful herb that also is carminative. So it tends to be digestion enhancing and it's just soothing and really wonderful as well. And it's easy, easy, easy to grow from seed.
All right. All right. So while we're talking about gut healing, please tell us about your gut healing mini course that you have.
Oh, yeah. So that's a fun course that brings you through three major lessons, plus there are a couple additional bonus videos, and the lessons are about 2 to 3 hours a piece. And so we do this a basic introduction to digestion, which is part of what's in my home herbalist series. And then the next two is the more advanced gut repair, which focuses more on the healing of gut issues and using herbs in some of the ways that we just talked about and really diving deeper into that. And so that's a two-part. There's about 2.5 to 3 hours a piece videos with lengthy notes and slides and all of that. And then there are additional bonus videos and remedy making videos that go into that. And so we talk about a lot of different things, but the focus is really the types of things that we were talking about today with supporting the integrity and the healing of the gut lining.
Okay, awesome. And then please tell us about your book, Body into Balance. I want to show it once again because you talk about the gut in here as well. So please
Yes.
elaborate on your book. Let us know a little bit more about, what's in your book and who it's for and all of that.
Yeah, I'm so happy with how that book came out, and I've been really honored by the response that it's gotten. And so, Body into Balance grew out of my Home Herbalist series and my Beyond the Home Herbalist series course materials. So it's sort of very similar to how I teach, and really how a lot of other herbalists teach their herbal programs. So we cover it's broken into body systems. So instead of being like A to Z herbs, it's focused on each body system. And so introducing how it's supposed to work, how it can get out of balance, and then how to work with herbs, diet, and lifestyle to bring it back into balance. And then exposing the concepts of certain types of actions, like we talked today about vulneraries and the bitter and the carminative, and talking about what those actions do, what herbs fit that, and then specific protocol and recipe ideas, depending upon what's going on in the person. And then there are, basic remedy making techniques in the back. And so I really have enjoyed, that way of working with and teaching herbs, and the gut health portion is the largest chapter in the whole book because, digestive health, not only do we live in a nation of disordered digestion where just a lot of us deal with digestive issues and don't have adequate healthy digestive function or tissues for a variety of reasons. In addition to that, gut healing plays into so many other body systems and health concerns. Like autoimmune disease often has some sort of a link to gut health and vitality. And so by supporting gut health, it may also have some indirect benefits for that, for thyroid, which is related to autoimmunity, for digestion. If you're not digesting your nutrients, even if you're eating a healthy diet, that can cause a breakdown of a lot of systems because you're not getting adequate nutrition for your nerves or your energy and so forth. So there are a lot of ways in which gut health has a major impact on the whole body. And so it often is an area of the body that we as herbalists will really focus on supporting and making sure that we can support optimum vitality in that area of the body, not just to deal with, more specific digestive complaints, but also overall well-being. So that's
Right.
kind of a little bit about that.
Yeah. And Julie says, great book. I love it. It is a wonderful book. Can you tell us a little bit about Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, your second book, right?
Yes. So Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies sort of builds on that theme of approaching things from a body system or health topic or herbal action approach. And so it covers different herbs that you might want to grow that are really easy to grow and work with in the garden, in most gardens across most of the United States. If you're down in like the tip of Florida or you're in the Southwest, then your ecosystem is really pretty different. So it might not be as specific, but for most of the country, nursery, you can grow most of the herbs in the book very easily. And then you get like 4 to 5 plants that are particularly amazing for soothing the stomach or boosting the brain or helping with relaxation at night or helping to support the pain response. Depending upon what's going on, you'll get a couple key herbs and why you might turn to those, because the goal is you want to try to find the herbs to grow that are most specific to your personal needs. And it's not about just growing, these 10 herbs for everybody, because what's going to be helpful for you can really vary, and what your family deals with might vary from household to household. So trying to key in on the herbs that might be most specific to you, and then how to make recipes just really simple but really awesome, the plants are amazing recipes with those herbs that you might be growing, and little tips and tricks to work with those. So that's sort of the layout of that particular book.
Right.
And that it just sort of continues that, but focusing more on easily cultivated and or common wild
Right.
plants.
And so you elaborate more on some of the herbs that we talked about today as well. So that's a good next stepping stool. And so just talk once again a little bit about your home herbalist series that should be coming up in June. So that's really exciting. So
Yes.
yes, please tell us where we can find it as well.
So on my website, wintergreenbotanicals.com, you can go on there and go to classes, and then you can get a layout of the course and all the different perks that go along with series registration and, the American Herbalist Guild memberships and other discounts to various different herb farms and herb shops and book publishers across the country, and what's covered. So pretty much we cover a lot of the foundational body systems. We cover basic nutrition with herbs that are nutritive. We cover kind of classic tea herbs. We talk about digestion, of course. We talk about stress and relaxation and supporting the nervous system and mood. We talk about detoxification support. We do a tiny bit of plant identification. We talk about blood sugar balance, because to me, that is another really foundational piece. It's only like 12% of American adults who are metabolically optimally healthy. And so that's another big thing, whether or not folks have a diabetes diagnosis. Most of us could use some support there. We talk about heart health, immune support, and then reproductive hormone balance. So those are our main topics and body systems. And then we also make all the pretty core remedy making techniques are included in class, as well as with more production remedy making videos. And so we talk about tea and tinctures and vinegar extracts and glycerin extracts, honey. We do some body care, making lip balms and creams, herb infused oils and salves. So we really cover a lot of the basics in that home herbalist series in just 9 classes with a bunch of bonus classes, but the core program is 9 classes. And there are also some virtual herb walks. Folks in person can do herb walks in my garden, but I have recorded videos of herb walks that everybody has access to as well.
Wow, that sounds really wonderful. And for those who are just joining, make sure you do watch the replay, because there is so much wonderful information. Is there anything else that you want to share before we go to the audience, to let them know about any other things that you have going on, or anything in closing?
Oh gosh. There's always stuff, but I think those are all the basics. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about gut support. Oh, actually, I will say that so on my website, wintergreenbotanicals.com, if you go to the Learn More tab, I have all sorts of virtual herb walks and recipes and the blog. And on the blog, under the health concerns, there is a whole blog on gut healing herbs and going a little bit more in depth into a lot of what we just spoke about, as well as various specific tea recipes that you could try out making. And so I think if you just typed in Wintergreen Botanicals /gut heal, it will come up. But regardless, you can get to it through the blog, and you can check that out for more information as well.
Yes, you did remind me. Look at the show notes, because there is links to the blog and all of these things that we were talking about. And thank you so much, Maria, for sharing all this information and for showing us how you make your own herbal remedies as well.
Awesome.
So, yes, and hello, LaRon. Thank you for joining. But since we have nothing else, make sure you watch the replay and add this, save this to a playlist and share with a friend, because this information is really needed. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you for all that you do. Your YouTube channel is so full of information. So thank you for all that you provide to the community.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. everyone have a wonderful day, and take some of this information and start incorporating some of these herbs into your life. Oops, sorry.